What's interesting about that is that it comes at a really key moment for NVIDIA. They're facing a lot of questions about whether the AI boom will keep up. Of course, DeepSeek, really rattled investors back in January, who started to question about whether there would be as much need for all those AI chips. Could AI be done on the cheap with far fewer accelerators and processors than have been needed before by the big hyperscalers? But Jensen Huang said this week several times, and even told investors as they released earnings at the end of last month, that look, this is a great breakthrough, but once you start to scale it and put it to function and actual use, you are going to need all of those chips and more. The demand will keep going, and they will continue to see business.
So does this enhance NVIDIA's capacity, or will it actually be taking business that's going on in Taiwan and bringing it here to the U.S.? Will it be in addition to or replacement of?
That's a good question. It's certainly one that authorities in Taiwan are wrestling with as they go through the approval.
They must be pretty nervous about this.
There is some discomfort about this. Seeing this big investment by a national champion here in the U.S. rather than back home did ruffle some feathers. But the way that some Taiwanese officials and certainly the ambassador to Taiwan, whom we spoke with yesterday for a print discussion, their view is that, look, this is accretive, not dilutive. This is something that will add to capabilities and resilience of supply chain.
You talked directly to the ambassador.
We talked directly to the ambassador, and we had a story out overnight on our discussion with him, and they really were trying to sell the upside of this. Look, it's a win-win for the self-governed island and for the U.S. in the trade relationship, and also for TSMC and Nvidia, because it adds some resilience to the supply chain, which is a question, especially since COVID, but also as China has made rumblings about perhaps taking the island back by force. So it is all connected, and NVIDIA also has to be thinking about that as a potential risk too.
As we spend time with Michael Shepard here on this day that NVIDIA announces plans to spend hundreds of billions of dollars in manufacturing here in the U.S., hand in hand with TSMC. What is it about Jensen Huang that makes him different than all these other executives? You think that this were any other company, they'd be in the Roosevelt Room with the president today, standing behind a podium, uncomfortably. Maybe Jensen would have the leather jacket, maybe not, to announce this as almost a political event. The one time he came to visit, they met, and there was no public-facing element. They didn't meet with the press, right? There was no oval event. Why does Jensen end up being the elusive one?
That is a great question, Joe, and it's one I've been wrestling with too, and it's one that we've, our team here in D.C. has confronted, because
is he just special?
He's kept a low profile in Washington. He has tried to maintain a little bit of distance. Tyler Kendall, our colleague who you just spoke with, was one of the few who actually cornered him here in Washington to ask him about some of the export controls and other restrictions that the company could be having to grapple with more intensely already. But he does cultivate his own air. The black leather jackets, the presentation that he gave during the conference the other day was really a spectacle. It was a sight to behold, and he really went through the life story of artificial intelligence as we know it, where NVIDIA fits in, what its current status is, and where it intends to go. And his call for new markets and new areas and use case scenarios, robotics, manufacturing, pharmaceuticals. So he is also trying to make sure he doesn't get too sucked into one part of the political body here in Washington and maintains a bit of that independence is just the best way we can read that right now.
He seems very careful about the way he places him. Maybe it's the celebrity executive. Maybe Trump kind of gives him some space for being the celeb.
And they also have a big ask underway right now with the Trump administration, because in the last week before leaving office, President Joe Biden's team left the incoming administration with a task of deploying and implementing this new AI diffusion rule. And this is, we've talked about this before, this is a new rule of export restrictions that sets limits on how many AI chips individual countries can buy. If you're a close ally of the U.S., It's no limit. There's no velvet rope. You can just walk right in.
Yeah.
Most countries actually face some restrictions on the amount of computing power that they can buy, and that limits the amount of Nvidia chips. They're really the only big player in this space when you get down to it. It limits how much they can sell to countries like the UAE, to Israel, and others, and those are big and perhaps growing markets for them. And especially as they face restrictions limiting how much they can sell to China, they really want to be able to expand into those other markets. So NVIDIA is really trying to get the Trump administration also to alter or somehow defang this rule in a way that would help them out.